Hello and good morning or good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to Level Up's latest webinar focused on responsible AI in hiring. I'm delighted to be hosting this. My name is Grant Jessup and I am our Chief Client Officer here at Level Up. And when I thought about doing this webinar, it was an interesting debate of what topic we should cover. Most people said, no, not another AI webinar. And so I thought we really need to think about what's practical. We really need to think about what is the crux of the challenge with AI right now. We've got adoption at its highest we've ever seen. We've got so many tools in the HR tech space coming out. So what is the challenge with AI right now? And I think, making sure that it's responsible is a really important aspect of our role across as HR and TA leaders across the space. And so we focused in on thinking about how do we look at that? What's the practical application of responsible AI when it comes to hiring? And so this webinar was thought when we thought about this webinar, it was really crucial to think about who could talk about that. And I'm delighted to introduce my guest speakers on this webinar today. I'll let them introduce themselves, as they could probably do a much better job than I can. And so I think I'll come to John. John and I obviously work together daily talking about AI. And so I thought who better to drag along to this webinar. So John, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Thank you, Grant. Hello, everybody. My name is John Fitzgerald, and as you can see, I'm the President and Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer. Spend a lot of my time really focusing on our AI strategy, our business, the solutions, and then what we're going to really dive a lot deeper on is the responsibility of AI. We can roll out, many different tools and solutions, but really, how do we do it on an ongoing, sustainable, and compliant basis is definitely one of our focuses.
Thanks, John. And John spent a considerable amount of time on the HR side, working with human resource leaders and TA leaders, right, John?
That is correct. So I spent about 25 years of my life within human resources. About my last 5 doing that as the CHRO of the Americas. So I've seen a lot of different changes, the transformational changes hitting organizations, and most particularly, the HR's axis, and then of course TA within that.
Thanks, John. And I may, for the audience benefit, refer to John as Fitz. That is his nickname. I work with him very closely. So if I flip between John and Fitz, I do apologize. He is one in the same. So thank you, John. And then when I thought about who else could we pull along to this, and we did have to pull along Wills because he's due to be going on holiday. And I think we're delaying him leaving to go on his holiday. So, Wills, I'm really glad that you took the time for this webinar. Welcome along. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Grant. Wills Catling, Director at Minor Partners. I lead the privacy and AI governance group here. And I'm delighted to be dragged along. It's certainly a topic that we hear a lot about. AI governance is very prevalent in the marketplace right now. And I think people are just trying to get, it's brand new. I don't want to say brand new technology because it's not really, is it? But it's a brand new problem. It seems like that people are just trying to get their arms around and understand how do we address this and how do we move forward in a responsible and an ethical way. So yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
Brilliant. Thanks, Wills. And for the benefit, again, of the audience, you may notice 2 British accents here. So John is alone here with his American accent. But Wills, you're actually based in the US, right? For our audience?
Yeah, I am based in the US, yes. But somehow I've managed to retain the accent. But I'm heading back there, so I'm sure it will come on even thicker in the next couple of weeks.
Exactly. Well, look, I think I just want to kind of frame the conversation for today. I think, you're both really, really deep within the AI space and understanding responsibility across it. And I think we're coming from different perspectives, right? I think, John, we're thinking about how to apply it holistically across journeys and really to advance, the operating models that we see across hiring and talent acquisition. And I think if you think about it on a spectrum, you've got those that are really for that. They're looking forward to the excitement of the advancements that can be realized through the application of AI. And then you've got this other side, which is the challenge. When we speak to clients, when we speak to candidates, this nervousness around what's happening with my data, what's happening with the information I'm giving to you. And I think on the opposite end of the scale, you've got to understand the risks of doing these advancements. And Wills, that's why I think it's great having you and your perspective there, because when I find that we think about, well, what are the blockers for us delivering AI across the journey? And I think the main thing is thinking about, how do we use that data responsibly? How do we make sure people are protected when they're being processed by these automated tools? And so I think that is a great area for us to focus this webinar on. And I think if we can give people confidence that there are ways to advance and do this in a responsible way, but also think about the potential blockers, pitfalls that other stakeholders around their teams might throw at them and how to overcome them, then this is it's not another AI podcast or webinar or seminar. It's really focused on what we need to understand and what we need to discuss today. So today's agenda is going to be focusing on the risk and operational landscape. That is more, it's not as compliance heavy or risky as some might worry. We're going to cover it in a really practical way. And then we are going to talk about a few of the questions. We've had some questions from those who have signed up, and we've got some other questions that we think are relevant to the people that are in this space right now. And then before we close, we'll come back to Wills for a practical framework that you can utilize and take away from this webinar and hopefully use within your organization. So there's a packed agenda. I'm really excited to get through it. Thank you again to my guests. And without further ado, I'll hand straight over to John to lead us with a few slides.
Okay, great. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Wills. I'm excited to hear what you have to say. On this slide, there are a couple of really important aspects to really pull out of here. So we have our maturity matrix here from early stage to mature. And if you read the news, I think we're all feeling like we already should be at mature and what is wrong with us, and we feel that pressure. That pressure is real, right? I think when we hear about it and we feel it within our organizations, that's where this ambition and this stress comes from all of our TA leaders. The reality is, based on a 2026 RPOA study of about 1,000 employers, majority of organizations are really still in the early stage. And really at the early stage, you're using AI, but it's not really systemic. It's not broad-based. We're using it for certain specific type of actions. And when we're in the early stage, the ROI is a bit difficult to measure. We're getting efficiencies, but we're not really yet seeing cost savings. We're not really seeing faster time cycles and the like. We are seeing improvements to a recruiter's job and recruiter's efficiencies, but nothing really significant. And when you're making these investments, what do people want? ROI, right? So then there continues to be that pressure. How quickly can we develop? How quickly can we get through? So the uncertainty around that ROI is also causing pressures. And then you have like IT leaders, the ones who are actually deploying the tools. Well, 39% of those IT leaders believe that the workforce is ready to adopt AI, compared to 7% of the operational leaders who believe they are ready to adopt AI. So we're sitting at this point where the people who are supposed to execute the AI are showing, less views of being capable and ready for that AI adoption. So this is really what's kind of slowing this adoption. We have all these pressures mounting. And there's a lot of things that Grant kind of alluded to that are helping slow down where we are. But if we all were to read the articles and what we feel each day, we're behind the scenes. But given that RPO study, I think we're all really where most of us are at, right? So intent is universal. The execution is still a little bit rare. So if we can go to the next slide, you as TA leaders are really sitting in a difficult spot, right? You're balancing all of these stakeholders. The C-suite is pushing really ambitious timelines on us. 43% of the executives, and by the way, some of these studies are coming from Gartner, SHRM, Korn Ferry. They have said that AI is their number one investment. Not shocking, but it's shocking when you realize that that's ahead of product innovation, right? So they're really putting AI investments within the whole organization above their product innovations, which is bringing them the revenue. So it really shows that importance that AI is coming into the universe. 66% of CEOs know that they need to change to stay competitive, but only 7% of them are reporting meaningful progress in that journey. So again, going back to the prior slide, that's why we're really all stuck in this early, but with the pressures of getting us to the next few stages in the adoption. So pressure continues to mount at the C-suite level, does not get any easier for TA leaders. Then we now have the legal and compliance conversations with us. So there's multitude of laws. AI is no different than just about any other regulation that I've had to deal with myself. There are different requirements based on state, local, federal, geographic changes. So they all have, bias auditing, slightly different interpretations. They all have disclosure and notice requirements. What that looks like is always very different. So especially if you're operating in a global environment, ensuring that you're staying compliant and ahead and being responsible about how you deploy and how you gain that trust of AI, that's really a big significance. And legal and compliance, I find, are playing a really valuable role in balancing that push for speed versus, hey, how do we hold our reputation? How do we make sure we have responsible AI? And Wills will go a little deeper on this point in today's meetings. We're also feeling the fear and distrust, and fear and distrust are everywhere. So when we look at the workers, approximately 50% of workers are fearing that AI are going to replace them. But ironically, with a SHRM study, it shows that about 60% of HR leaders are saying skills building is a very important aspect in AI, but they've only seen about 7% displacement. So what that's saying is jobs are definitely changing, but they're not disappearing. Although some of the studies would make you feel, and some of the articles make you feel that that's the case. Projection-wise, I don't know. Maybe it can get there. But I think with the regulations and with people's trust and fears, the human judgment, the human intervention will always be there. Critical thinking will always be there. As a matter of fact, critical thinking is still one of the highest skills that employers are looking for in their humans to help them interact with AI. So not only is it the AI skill building, but also having the critical thinking capabilities. There are only 1/4 of applicants who trust AI to fairly evaluate them in the process. That's a significant number. That's a significant thing that we have to deal with. And on the other side, employers are stating that fraudulent and fake applicants are their most significant concern. And the interesting part of that is it's really coming from the same point, right? We're trying to automate our processes. We're trying to become more effective, more efficient, quicker, which is leading candidates to deploy different tools to help them be able to be the best suited candidate. And so it's kind of cause and effect of what is happening at this point. The fake applicants and so forth, those are just bad actors, right? That's something we have to be looking at. But we do see candidates who are trying to optimize their resumes and their opportunities to be seen because of the way the process is going. So the utilization of AI is definitely creating a fear and distrust from all stakeholders. And then the adoption of our own teams. We talked about the fear they have, but we need to train, we need to communicate. We need to be really intentful on how we're talking about the value for candidates, for our teams, and for our clients. The TA leaders, you're at the forefront. It's your responsibility to be really effective in communicating that to all the various stakeholders and being a leader in change management. The TA leaders who are seeing the big picture, who can reconcile those competing demands that you're seeing on that screen, you're really becoming indispensable. Being able to bring a organization along that AI maturity, interacting with the external environment with the candidates, holding that reputational risk securely while driving significant ROI is really going to be a successful indicator of TA leaders, right now and in the future. So I'll say this, it's exciting to be a TA leader. It's also a little bit stressful, but I would rather be here than being led by AI. So you are leaders of AI, and I hope you guys the best. And now I'm going to pass it over to Wills to help us talk a little bit deeper about the way we can work with the AI responsibly.
Thanks, John. And just before we flip to Will's slides, I really like this infographic. It is a balancing act right now, and that really describes that opening statement I mentioned between the kind of two ends of the spectrum, but multiplied by all the different stakeholders. This feeds through the organization. And I remember in some exec level chats I've had in the history, it's always competing priorities that are happening, and you say, well, which one can drop? Like, let's let one fire burn out for a little while. You have to. You just can't do everything. And I'm seeing that actually that's not the case now. People are not doing that with AI. They're actually halting programs or not going down programs. And that's quite interesting, that it's a slightly different approach here. That we're not going to let any of these areas or these balls drop in this infographic. And that's quite a high pressure environment to be in. But as you say, a very exciting place to be in right now. So, Wills, over to you.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you, John. Yeah, I think, and certainly to your points there with fear and distrust and the applicants and their fear of being fairly judged. I think we'll talk about that a little bit in these slides from an AI governance perspective. But I think to echo what you were saying is that most organizations now are deploying, if not all organizations are deploying AI tools. That cat's out of the bag. The genie is out of the bottle. We're not putting it back. We've just got to work out how do we actually implement them properly. So now the challenge is becoming in more so, how do we actually govern these AI systems? I don't think it's a question of, in the talent acquisition area, using or not using AI. It's moving through to thinking about how do we use it responsibly and ethically. And what we're seeing in practice, I suppose, from an advisory perspective, is that there is this gap that exists between the actual buying or purchasing of the AI tools and then the actually governing of those AI systems or tools once they're implemented. We certainly hear that companies think that responsible AI is being accomplished within their organization because they've done their vendor selection exercise before they picked the AI system. But I think that's not sufficient anymore. You've got to move beyond that. And I know we say on the slide and we talk a lot about responsible AI being a legal hurdle. I don't think it's a legal hurdle anymore. I think we're beyond that. I think it's a necessity now within organizations. And, to give an example of what we're thinking here or what I'm talking about is, if you don't have that proper governance in place, how do you know those AI tools are being trained on the correct data? How do you know they're not being trained on old data that may mirror prior discriminatory practices, which kind of like links back to the question of, am I being fairly judged? So from an AI governance perspective, which is a lot of what I'm going to talk about, yes, it exists before you bring that vendor on, but it really starts after your procurement and after you've brought that vendor on. And I think I always like to think of it as the kind of 4 pillars of responsible AI governance. And, I call this as you said, Grant, the English will come out in me here, but I always call it the granny test. It's like, would I be comfortable explaining to my grandmother, or would I be comfortable with my grandmother's information being used in this fashion with this AI tool? And there's kind of 4 key things I usually think about. It's the ethical use. Are you ensuring that you're being ethical and responsible with the use of that data? Are you promoting transparency? Again, we come back to the prior point about building trust with candidates, building trust with stakeholders. Are you being transparent on what you're doing and how the system's working? Have you mitigated risks before you implement the system? Have you been able to identify and then mitigate those risks for things like bias and to address privacy concerns, like you said? And then again, going back to what John was talking about, the regulatory compliance requirements, it never stops. It's not going to stop. It continues to change on a regular basis. It's a full-time job to keep up with it. Are you as an organization monitoring those regulations? Do you understand how they apply to you? And can you ensure that you're able to stay within the boundaries so that you don't get yourself in trouble? So I think we can move on to the next slide. So what are organizations getting wrong? What are the biggest mistakes we're seeing? I often think, and I'll talk, as you said, a little bit about a framework in a future slide, but it's always good to kind of I don't want to give war stories, but it's always useful to hear, you're not alone in this. This is the challenge that companies are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So some of the key things that we see, or things we see that where mistakes are being made or where things are not being done correctly. First of all, it's treating AI adoption as a technology decision alone, rather than overall a governance decision. Most issues we see are not necessarily caused by the model or the AI system. They're typically caused by the lack of oversight around it. So the key points I've highlighted here, as I said, treating AI as a tool, not a system, being seen as just another feature in the ATS world, not mapping it as an end-to-end decision system, which it typically is. I feel like AI governance fails when organizations don't realize that they're creating a decision pipeline and they're not just implementing a tool. So over-reliance on vendors. I think we've all seen this. The vendor says they're compliant and we take it at face value and say, perfect, thank you. You're not undertaking internal validation of what they're telling you, or you're not doing audits on what they're telling you. This raises risk for you as an organization. Ultimately, we typically see that in these situations, the employers remain liable, even when they're using third-party tools. So you can outsource the technology, but you're not going to outsource the accountability. Third one, mistaking bias testing for governance. Bias testing, I always think of, is like a one-off audit, and then doing that and thinking, hey, we're covered, we're good, we can move forward. You were covered in that instant. It's not ongoing, consistent monitoring of the AI platform or AI system. So compliance, as we know, should always be continuous, not a one-time effort. I always like to say, bias audit to me, I think of as a snapshot. And I'll show my age here, a Polaroid, taking a Polaroid picture of something. Whereas governance I see as more as a surveillance system across the whole AI platform. The next big mistake we see is no meaningful human oversight in the process. And I think this comes back to where, again, that fear and distrust, or the applicants feeling they're being unfairly judged. Human in the loop is a term we often use, but often when we see companies have this, it only exists in a paper format. It doesn't really exist operationally. So often you may see recruiters may rubber stamp AI outputs. Ultimately, if there is a human in the loop, which there should be to help that trust and mature that trust, that oversight is going to have to be meaningful. It can't just be tokenistic. So if the human who is in the role realistically can't override that AI decision, then you don't have oversight, you just have automation. And then lastly, lack of transparency to candidates. Again, I think this goes back to building that trust. It's like if you're providing poor or generic or out-of-date notices, it's easy to spot. If the notice says last updated, it's right there at the top. If that's 2 years ago, probably it's out of, realistically that should be looked at on an annual basis and updated to be accurate. based on what you're doing when it comes to the collection of the data, the use of the data, where AI is involved in those decisions. And I think, again, it goes back to maybe a prior world where transparency was treated more as a legal disclaimer, whereas nowadays, let's be honest, it really is a trust mechanism that should be built. So I think with that, we can move to the next slide.
Thanks, Wills. And sorry, you got one more, haven't you?
Oh, that's okay. If you've got questions, I'm happy to answer.
No. I think it's fascinating, but I'm ready and raring with the audience's questions. But you've got one more slide, so you go, Wills.
I'll make it quick. I promise. My children will tell you I can talk for years. So what does good look like? You said, like John said at the beginning, a simplified, practical, or maybe it was Grant, sorry, framework that you can kind of take away and consider as a basis for what you could think about as you start to move your AI journey forward. I think the first step, and I'll break this into two: A, appoint an AI governance lead, and then B, establish a governance committee around AI. And then before moving forward, and I say this to all clients, it's like inventory it, create the inventory, know your AI, map all the tools that influence hiring decisions. Because if you don't have that information, how can you move forward? You're living in a vacuum. Once you know the systems, the recommendation I would make is that you assess them pre-deployment. So if it's a privacy or data protection aspect, do your DPIAs or data protection impact assessments, or in the US, do your privacy risk assessments. Also do those BIOS audits so you know what you're dealing with before you deploy the system. Define human oversight. We just talked about that. Where does the human come into the decision? Making sure that that is defined and understood by the people who are going to be in the decision. The third one, this is kind of a big one, the contractual control. Vendor assessments, understanding your vendors and the contracts. Ensuring that the data usage restrictions are documented in those contracts. Make sure that you agree on what audit rights you have with those third parties. Require explainability documentation. Again, if they can't explain it to you, how are you going to explain it to your customers? And when looking at that, some critical vendor questions. I was thinking about this before I came on the call, so I jotted down a few that could certainly be used. Asking them, how was the model trained? What data sets did you use to undertake the training? How often is the model retrained? Because we know data sets change very quickly. Can you as the company audit it independently? And what data do you retain or reuse if you're collecting data from me? And can we as a company explain these decisions to candidates? And I always think that I heard somebody say many, many years ago, so I'm going to steal this line, but a good vendor demo shows performance, good governance conversations show evidence. And I always think that's very accurate. So, and then the fourth, communication, transparency. I think this, again, we've kind of talked about this a little bit, trust, fear. This is where all this comes from. Make sure your notices are clear. Make sure they're easy to understand. Make sure they document a clear path to enable that applicant, if they don't feel they're being fairly judged, to be able to opt out of the AI decision and get a human review of the decision. Make sure you have a documented candidate appeal process so that if, again, they're not happy, they know how the process works and what they have to go through. And then monitoring, this is that ongoing part. Continue to monitor adverse impacts. Have tracking technology so you can track things like selection rates, rejection rates at each stage of the AI-driven pipeline. And then re-audit this regularly, whether this is annually or when a material change happens with the AI model. And then finally, train and improve, building the capabilities out over time. Help to train the recruiters, HR, legal, procurement teams on how these AI tools are going to work and where the governance controls apply. Also make sure that you monitor the results, monitor candidate feedback, monitor audit findings, and then use this to improve the process over time. This will only build the trust within the environment. And by building those internal capabilities, responsible AI kind of becomes part of your day-to-day practice. It doesn't just exist as a one-off compliance exercise.
Thanks, Wills. That's great. And funnily enough, you preempted two of my questions, so that was great. Really good. I think I think the really important part that, for anyone who is frantically trying to write those questions down or that information down, I will tell you more about a guide that we will share in the next couple of slides. But I really agree with that, relying on vendor knowledge, that 0.3 vendor controls. That is a really important point, and that is a big pitfall that we see in many organizations. Oh, well, yeah, they said they can do this. Or they said, we don't need to worry about that. And people have seen them as the specialists. And I think asking those questions. So if we can flip to the next slide, please. We just have a few questions that we wanted to just dive in before we wrap up. And so a couple of the ones that I did want to pick out. So we did get asked about kind of the vendor questions, but you really helpfully already covered that. The responsible AI adoption, I think, is a combination of the 6 points that you mentioned. But one of the ones that I wanted to, I'll maybe come to you, Fitz, first, is what conversations should HR leaders be having internally right now that they're not having enough of?
That's really good. I think first, like, who owns when things go wrong, right? I think there needs to be that dialogue and understand, because, hopefully you can find something before it gets too large, and then you know who's responsible and who to raise it to, and who to sort of rectify all of that. So you can always identify who's responsible for implementing the tool, but who is responsible really for that monitoring and that escalation, of course, that training, and making sure that the biases are well managed. I think second, it's really spending a lot of time on change management, right? Getting people across the organization comfortable with the utilization of AI, supporting their business, how they're going to conduct their roles, how they're going to be protecting that reputation. That's a big part of the activities. So not just, hey, I've deployed it and I execute it, but how do you communicate it? How do you keep it live? And how do people know exactly what it's doing?
Thanks. Wills, anything to add there?
I think you covered it all. I mean, I would just say the only thing I would add is, can the conversations HR leaders could have is whether the organization can explain and how do they challenge AI assisted outcomes.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I've been seeing in conversations is that close alignment between HR leaders and TA leaders. I think the fact that many of the regulation updates that we're seeing is bringing candidate data and processing of candidate data as high risk categories means that this is quite an important area for both TA leaders and HR leaders to think about from an agentic point of view, in terms of like thinking about human versus agent, and also from a TA hiring journey perspective. So I think there's a real, don't just trust the people that have done that diligence. We need to look at it from both lenses. We talked earlier about that kind of balancing AI benefits with risk. This has come up a lot in the conversation. It's also, I think, about the third of people surveyed by RPOA recently said that organizations are struggling to balance the benefits with the risk. And another 21%, I believe it was, struggle with leadership buy-in. So, Wills, I'll come to you first. Why do you think that gap, why is that gap there? And what can people do to close it?
Another very good question. I suppose I'd flip this on its head and say, hey, you got 71% or 71%. See, my math's good on a Thursday morning, that are not struggling with balancing the AI benefits, and 79 that are not struggling with leadership buy-in, which is an astounding number. But I do think the gap exists because AI is often framed as kind of like innovation first, and then from my perspective, governance second. And I think that's probably why I would say that. And closing the gap, a practical framework. As I said before, inventory, document what you've got, understand what you've got, assess it, control it, communicate to the users how you're using it, and then continue to monitor and improve it.
And I know that we're all kind of living and breathing this day in, day out, right? So we see a lot of adoption, a lot of organizations, but there are some organizations that are at the beginning of their journey. They've not made a leap into thinking about, particularly from a system perspective. They've probably done one or two tools, but like actually thinking about having it as a system across the organization. So I'll come to both of you. So Fitz, if you want to go first, but think about that person who's listening today. It's their very beginning. What's the single most important step that they should take, let's say this week? What's the most impactful thing they could do if they're at the beginning of their journey thinking about responsible AI?
I mean, I think we talked a bit about it is, do you have the leadership support from the beginning? And then if so, what's that budget look like? So you understand, and what the timeline is, and do they understand, the full spectrum of undertaking, a tool selection, and then a tool deployment, right? So I think that's really, if they're going to do it, they need to make sure I have it at the top. They're going to support me as I go through this organization. I have funding. I know what I need to do. Now I need to select the right tool, bring my partners in with me, to help with that selection, and then work on that deployment. So really the strategic aspect of aligning is what I think has to happen first, rather than just reacting. Too often people like, I need to do something. Here's a tool I heard from a friend. I'm going to go do that. That's one of the biggest mistakes.
Yeah. Wills?
Totally agree. And I'd say from a governance perspective, I start with, if you're starting the journey, start with visibility again. Identify where you're using AI. Where is AI enabling decisions within your hiring process? Make sure that you understand that you've documented it. And then I suppose then starting to think about, for each point, can it be explained? If it's challenged, can it be defended? And then I think jumping back to one of my prior slides, use that inventory to prioritize the risk assessments and make sure that the governance for each of them and the ownership is defined.
Yeah, I also like to come back to thinking, think about it as a holistic journey, and how much value. Where are the critical points right now in the organization, or even in the hiring journey, or the TA journey, or talent management as a whole? Where are those most critical? I sometimes worry that people skip to, I've got a responsible compliance framework. I know who I need to talk to, but they haven't really delved into the true problem. So I would advocate for that as well on my side, just from the conversations that I see. Okay, so two more questions. Quick fire round on this, because I know we're at time and we've got one or two more slides to get through. I think on the side of the vendor side, I would like to think about, what should they be listening to in the answers, Wills? Because you mentioned there's good questions. You gave really good questions. But what should they be listening for from the responses? Because we know that all sales teams in these new shiny AI tools, they're great. They're great at responding. What should we be listening to in the answers of the questions to really feel confident on that vendor?
I think it's, if you've got a robust third-party risk management process, it's bolting in the AI governance to that process that you have within the organization. And then it's looking for, the example questions I gave. I think when you talk to the companies, it's like, are they comfortable answering those questions? Can they answer those questions? Do they have the documents readily attainable that they can kind of document for you what you're asking? Because when you're saying to them, how was the model trained? If they start humming and hawing, I mean, being really quick here, I attended a speaker last year who was a former judge from a high-level district, and he was talking about that when these AI systems are ending up going to court, which think at some point they will, he was talking about the challenge is going to be, you're not going to be able to stand up there and say, it's a black box, I don't understand it. You'll have to talk to the vendor. That's not going to work. You're going to have to be able to explain how that model is coming up with those results and the information it's been trained on. So I'd say it's look for Look for vendors that are comfortable answering the questions and actually can give you the information and are open to you undertaking those regular audits. Those that kind of stall you or can't give you the information, there's no shortage of AI solutions out there. So it's like, go and look for one who really does have a robust model and can explain it to you, can help you to implement it the way you want to implement it, can bring value to your organization rather than risk to your organization.
Yeah, really good answer. And I think, that one of the things that we certainly saw, John, when we were looking at possibly do we do proprietary for our organization or do we do vendors? And we looked at a lot of the vendors, and I think there was a lot of this sheepishness, should I say, if even that's a word, around the answers. And actually we had to ask ourselves, can we explain this to our clients? Can we explain the processing and how this is working? And if you can't give us that answer, then that is a big challenge. So the final question for today, and I'll start with Fitz, if you could give an answer to this, and then Wills, I know that you've got a slide on this because I did do some prep for this session. So I will ask Fitz and then let you go into it. But thinking forward now, like we've talked about what we're doing right now, but things have changed in the last 12 months dramatically in the way we're approaching AI, the way we're adopting it. So as organizations head into 2027, I can't believe I'm even saying that, as our organizations head into 2027's planning, what should be at the top of every HR and TA leader's priority list? And what is the one thing they cannot afford to leave out of the conversation with leadership? So for that 2027 planning Fits.
Okay, yeah, 2027 is sad to hear. But I would repeat, plan for AI accountability, right? At the end of the day, the pressure is to get AI in, but at the end of the day, you're also going to be the one who's going to be accountable for it. So make sure you really understand what your role is about AI accountability. Make sure the organization understands the importance of AI accountability and why, how it supports the business, how it supports the brand, and why that part of your job, this additive part of your job is really important.
Perfect. And Wills, I suppose this is a nice segue into your slide.
Didn't plan it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think to keep it short and sweet, I expect more scrutiny in 2027. Let's be honest. More documentation expectations we put on you as an organization. Regulations are still, in their infancy. Let's be honest. There's limited examples of enforcement yet, but don't take that as a sign of where the world is going to go. So there's going to be more pressure for organizations to show governance in practice as they move forward. And I think the organizations that move the fastest with regards to this and AI adoption are going to be those that can prove control and not just adoption of the AI tools. So I think responsible AI is going to become part of normal TA operational discipline. I don't think it's going to be a separate compliance project in 2027. And I think, I'm going to come back to my mantra here. Tomorrow's first step, map every AI tool that influences hiring so that you have a starting point.
Thanks, Wills. So if we can go to the final slide. First of all, I'd just like to thank everyone for listening in today, and for those who are watching this online. You can scan this QR code on screen now and download our Responsible Foundation for AI in Hiring guide. It is available by scanning the QR code. It is also available on our website in the resources section. So please do have a look at that. If you want more information, please do contact with Wills, John, or I and ask us any questions. I think the one thing that I'll leave everyone with is, let's not take no for an answer, right? I think we have in the HR, human resources, recruiting landscape and industry across the globe navigated complex labor laws and regulations for many, many years. The question that we should be asking ourselves is, why can't we do this within the regulation? Because we've done every other regulation, and we can. So don't stop just because it feels hard, it feels risky. or it feels like it might not be responsible. Let's find a way to make it responsible. Let's ask those questions, and let's be the innovators and drivers that we all want to be to move ourselves forward. So thank you again, Wills, John, for joining us today. Really enjoyed your conversation and answers to your questions. And thank you again to our listeners. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grant.